Yeah, we're going to introduce Tyler Cray. He does need an introduction, but I'm not going to give him one. You'll learn as we go along through this what Tyler's topic is, and at the end there'll be a couple more remarks, okay? So please, nice hand for Tyler here.
Thank you all so much, and thank you so much to the 1916 committee, the Kaylee Club, to piggyback on what Jim said. It's so important to have places and spaces of community like this now more than ever, and it's amazing. This is my first time here, but being able to come here and experience this is really, really amazing. This is a fantastic space that you all have here, as I can already tell, a fantastic group of people. So thank you all for having me, and thank you to the 1916 committee for always putting this on. It's a lot of hard, thankless work that doesn't get enough recognition. So thank you to all of you for coming in to listen to this talk, which, as you can see, ambush, reprisal, riot, and reform, the connection between British colonial policing in Ireland and the Palestine Mandate from 1918 to 1948. A lot of words to essentially say, how are these two worlds of Ireland and Palestine connected? Recently in the news, obviously in the past couple of years, there has been this continued conversation of kind of solidarity between Ireland and the struggle of the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank. And why is that connection there? There's a lot of obvious reasons, but there's also a lot of underlying history that doesn't get talked about. The last 70 years, I think, gets most of the coverage in the news and in general, but there's, I think, a deeper history that doesn't always get all of that coverage. And that always, as you can imagine, comes back to the British. And particularly British colonial policing, because they are the ones on the ground that are carrying out all of the official British mandates in Ireland and eventually in Palestine. And hopefully through this lecture, I'll be talking a little bit about a lot of things that some of you already probably know a lot about, but then hopefully getting into some items that you don't know quite so much about, and seeing that connection directly from the moment of independence in Ireland and how that moment of independence translates into the Palestine Mandate and that deep connection that exists between these two regions of the world. So without further ado, we will get into a topic that in this particular room, I think people in here know more about this topic than anywhere else in the world. And that is Ireland, home rule, the struggle for home rule, the very, very long struggle for home rule, and eventually the 1916 Rising. The period that I'll be discussing is not just about the long struggle for home rule, but really specifically about 1918 to 1922 for this period. However, for context, I think it's really important to have a basic discussion about the more recent fight for home rule in the 19th century, or the 20th century rather, within Ireland. And this fight for autonomy within the British Empire, from the British Empire, had been going on since the 1870s, and in many ways, long before that. If you go back to the Act of Union itself, if you go back to Cromwell, this idea of separatism has been embedded in the struggle for Ireland to separate from Great Britain for centuries. But as far as constitutional means for separating from Great Britain, 1870 and the four or so real attempts at home rule from there until independence are really important for this time period. These efforts at constitutional change seem like they had enough support in Parliament from 1870 a couple times throughout there, but really the most significant one is the 1914 home rule attempt. Right on the eve of World War I, this seems like the best chance for home rule. This seems like when it's actually going to happen, there is some measure of success. However, with the start of World War I, the issue gets tabled, and that is really the end of the conversation. And the end of the conversation for many in Ireland, as well as constitutional means are no longer seen as a viable route to separating from the British Empire. And this is when nationalist groups like Sinn Féin, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and Irish Volunteers lost their patience with the constitutional means towards separating and turned toward more violent means with the Easter Rising, of course, of 1916. As we all know, or most of us know, volunteers seized the governmental post office in Dublin along with several other strategic government buildings, and for several days until several days later they were captured by British military forces. The rising received little popular support at that moment in time. However, until the leaders of this rising, the 16 leaders or 14 leaders and 2 others, were executed shortly thereafter. It wasn't until this moment that the rising really receives popular support, or at least a measure of popular support within Ireland. And the execution of these individuals really brought that broad support for a growing independence movement and really drove it forward into 1919 when Sinn Féin was the dominant political force in Ireland and declared independence from Great Britain under the breakaway government known as the Dáil Éireann. So this is really where everything starts. And this is where the issue that I'm particularly most interested in, policing, really starts to change. Up until this point, policing in Ireland is relatively homogenous, has not really changed a whole lot in this time period. However, after the rising, and then for several years after, as things start to devolve into greater violence, policing also changes. The way that the British Empire wants to police Ireland inherently changes, in many ways, obviously, for the worse. And we will see that with policing in Ireland. Now, there are largely unarmed municipal metropolitan police forces that are operating at this time, particularly within the British Empire. But we're really going to be focusing on the Royal Irish Constabulary and how they evolve and how they how they will grow to absorb the infamous Black and Tans and the Auxiliary Division as well. The Royal Irish Constabulary, the RIC for short, is an armed paramilitary police force that has been in operation since the early 19th century. At the time of the Rising, they are comprised of about 30% Catholic officers and about 70% of their regular ranks are Catholic. The remaining, obviously, are Protestant. So the leadership of the RIC is predominantly Protestant, but the vast majority of the ranks of the lesser ranks, the non-officers, are Catholic. And within the British Empire itself, the RIC is seen as kind of a primary model of policing across the empire. The model that the RIC have created and perfected is exported across the British Empire. There's basically 2 main models that the British Empire employs. That's the metropolitan model, which if you think about the Dublin Metropolitan Police or the London Metropolitan Police, these unarmed police officers that are usually just doing patrol work, doing day-to-day detective work, kind of working within these large cities and large towns to some extent, but not really leaving that jurisdiction. That is one model that is often used by the British Empire, typically in white dominions like Australia and Canada. Meanwhile, the other model is literally called the Irish model, and it is because of the RIC. They are an armed paramilitary police force. They operate out of barracks. They have a much more rigid and regimented military rank structure. And they operate not in cities, but kind of outside the jurisdiction of any one county or any one province. This model, after the RIC again has been in operation for over 100 years, this model is implemented and then exported across the empire, particularly to regions where the British Empire deems there are troublemakers and they need to be rooted out. So this model gets exported all over into the Middle East, as we will see. It gets exported into places in Africa in the early 20th century, in Jamaica, Trinidad, all over the empire, where they know that they need a firmer hand to deal with the native population. And so these 2 models are really perfected, the one by the RIC. And so you have a very well-trained police force in Ireland at the moment of the Rising. And after the Rising execution and growing support for independence, the RIC is the group that is most frequently tasked with tamping down nationalist fervor and increasingly nationalist violence as well. However, they were not really equipped. Even though they were well trained for this, they're an armed force, Their training is rigorous. They're not trained to be putting down kind of nationalist fervor within their own country. And so that really starts to become a problem for the RIC. As number one, they do not have the numbers for this, and their numbers also start to falter because they're not necessarily interested in policing their family and friends in this kind of way. Their loyalty to Ireland starts to become a major sticking point for a lot of these officers. So the RIC, after the Rising and increasingly throughout 1918, and especially in 1919, the resignations from the RIC become tremendous. And so at the moment when they need greater numbers, they're actually losing those officers to loyalty most often. They don't want to be associated with this brand of British rule within Ireland. And so those numbers start to drop dramatically. To remedy its shortcomings and its low numbers, in early 1920, the RIC began to supplement its ranks with former World War I veterans. This group becomes known as the infamous Black and Tans, and then shortly thereafter, the Auxiliary Division as well. And these units, in contrast to the RIC, they receive almost no training. From some of the sources that I've seen, if you enlisted, and if you told whoever was enlisting you that you had infantry experience in the war, you were given 1 day of training and then you were sent out to your station. So the emphasis becomes clear that this is not going to be about police work. This is going to be a much more heavy-handed military-style rule in Ireland coming from ostensibly the police. So that becomes clear just from the training that these new recruits, the Black and Tans in particular, are receiving. And this is exactly what happened throughout 1920 and the first half of 1921 as violence raged between primarily the Black and Tans and the IRA in a ambush reprisal relationship, as you can tell from the title of the lecture. The IRA would ambush a Black and Tan patrol. The Black and Tans burned down the house of the person that they suspected did this. And this goes back and forth for years. The violence reaches its height early in 1921 and is nearly constant. IRA members are being hunted down, tortured, and killed. RIC officers and Black and Tans are being dragged out of their homes and assassinated in front of their families. So the violence is reaching a real crescendo in the spring and into the summer. And so as it reaches that crescendo, peace talks start to increase. It becomes more important, at least from the British perspective, to figure out a solution to this because they are losing a lot of manpower, they're losing a lot of money, and whenever the British Empire starts to lose money, that's when it starts to question its own decisions. And so peace comes relatively soon thereafter with a ceasefire on July 21st and independence in December of 21. The RIC and the Black and Tans then they're taken out of duty early in 1922, and they are officially disbanded from service in May of 1922. And that is where, initially when I was writing my dissertation, that's where my question started was, I know this story of the Black and Tans, I know I know something of what happened in Ireland, but what happened to these individuals when they were done in Ireland? What happened to them? And as I started to look at it, it turned out that almost to a man, at least from the Black and Tans, but also from the RIC and some of the auxiliary, almost to a man, the Black and Tans signed back up for British service, but now with the British gendarmerie in the newly created Palestine Mandate. And so all of these Black and Tans are part of this new force that is going into a pretty volatile region in the Palestine Mandate. And there is a lot of fear that I'll be talking about in a little bit, but a lot of fear, a lot of trepidation about whether or not the violence from Ireland, this kind of ambush reprisal relationship, is going to just be directly exported to Palestine. Is that same thing going to happen with the Arab population in Palestine? But we will have to hold on to that thought for just a moment to explain the kind of context that these officers are entering into, this newly formed British gendarmerie. So to talk briefly about the Palestine Mandate and how this comes about, as again, I think this is part of the history that doesn't get talked about quite as much. I know I've heard it in some spaces about the deeper history of not only the regional tension in this area, of course, but also the relationship between Ireland and Palestine itself, and this kind of linchpin that exists between them. So to talk about the Palestine Mandate for just a moment, we have to understand the absolute chaos that exists during World War I within the British government, because it does not know exactly what it is doing. And it cannot account for everything that is going on within the British government. As on May 16th, 1916, Britain and France, led in secret discussion by Sir Mark Sykes and Francois Georges Picot of France, settle upon what becomes known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement, officially known as the Asia Minor Agreement. And you can see a visual representation of essentially how they would split up the Middle East among the ruling powers at the conclusion of World War I. So if you're able to see it, the way this would be broken up is between Britain, France, Russia, and in this, Italy as well. There would be areas where they would have direct control. Those were usually the most fertile or the most profitable lands. And then there would be areas where they would have kind of a sphere of influence. They would be shepherding these populations along towards self-rule, much like they were supposed to do in Ireland. And so you can see for the British there in that kind of tan khaki color down at the bottom, orangish. The dark orange, where Kuwait just so happens to be, and most of the oil in the region, that's where the British would own that as property. And the rest of the region, non-arable desert, would be areas that they would try to help along towards self-government. And so it's much the same for France, for Russia. Still at this time during these conversations, Russia is still part of the war effort, and Russia still exists. So they're talking about how to divvy this up, and most importantly for this, what we would know today as Israel becomes an area of international control. So nobody would own the Palestine region. It would be kind of jointly controlled by Britain and France and administered by Britain and France, again, until such a time that they can have self-government. And so that is what is put forth by one ministry within the British government, is the Sykes-Picot Agreement. However, at the same time, British Foreign Secretary Arthur James Balfour saw a Jewish homeland in Palestine as a necessity for post-war stability in the region. And these kinds of promises, the promises of a Jewish homeland, a Jewish state, were made to Zionist activist Lord Walter Rothschild in November of 1917. So Lord Walter Rothschild, very influential in British culture and British politics, very, very wealthy, also influential and instrumental in the early 20th century, kind of establishing Jewish immigrants in the Holy Land as the preferred intermediaries between Great Britain and any business activities in the Holy Land. So rather than dealing with local Arab populations, Rothschild proposes that Jewish immigrants should really be the middleman for railroad operations, electrification operations, all of these different really profitable and burgeoning enterprises in the Levant. Rothschild is one of, among other Zionist leaders like Chaim Weizmann and others, who really proposed that the Jewish population should be the preferred method for Great Britain to take part in that business. So the Balfour Declaration made by Lord Balfour to Rothschild is another secret plan for the Middle East that nobody else knows about. Then we have yet another secret plan from British High Commissioner Sir Henry McMahon to the Emir of Mecca, Hussein ibn Ali, who agreed to an independent Arab state in exchange for Arab opposition to the Ottoman Empire. Again, in World War I, World War I is still raging. Things aren't going fantastic for the Allied powers. And so to have to help out the Russians, to have a little bit of pressure taken off of the Eastern Front, having the Ottomans out of the fight more quickly with issues in their own homeland would be a lot better for the Allied cause. So getting Ibn Ali on board with this would really help the Allied war effort. And so McMahon gets them to agree to this, to start essentially an internal revolution within the Ottoman Empire in exchange for the promise of a free Arab state in the Middle East. Again, nobody else knows about this, and no one has talked about these other secret agreements until this point. And this would have been a great issue, as Arab groups agreed, angered over broken promises and eventually Jewish immigration, as we'll talk about, make up 93% of the total population of this region. And so after all three of the, over the course of about 2.5 years, all of these agreements are made and they become public. And after they become public, everybody is angry because everyone was promised something different and nobody's going to get what they want. And so this is going to cause a great amount of discontent throughout the region. Zionists were mad because they don't get their homeland that they were promised. Jewish and Arab communities are angry because they're not getting the state that they were promised. And obviously the Sykes-Picot Agreement is not going to go over well when you find out that your richest territory is no longer going to be owned by you. And regardless of any of the agreements that have been made, the Zionist movement of the late 19th and early 20th centuries encouraged a lot of Jewish immigration starting in the 1890s and in some ways even before that into the region. So you have this increasingly large Jewish population into the Levant, and that is only going to continue and only going to make this delicate situation even more difficult to deal with. And this leads, obviously, as the Sykes-Picot Agreement is not going to work, the newly formed League of Nations is left after the war, after Russia has kind of fallen out and given in to its own revolution. The League of Nations is left with the task to kind of once again draw a line and kind of figure it all out after. And that is essentially what the mandate system becomes, which is the map there on the bottom. You have Great Britain and France. They're really the only two powers that can still handle a mandate system, the responsibility of that. Great Britain gets the lion's share of this, including all of the Palestine region. In addition to that, they get what would be the Transjordan region today, most all of Iraq and the oil that comes with it. And they are going to be in charge of administering all of this. Again, directly administering all of these lands. France will have what is mostly modern day Syria. And they, again, are given the task to manage these lands with the aim towards self-government. So help prop up these folks until they can rule themselves. Something that Great Britain has proven it is not very good at. And so this is where the situation sits as the Irish War for Independence starts to draw to a close, and eventually, a couple of years later, that these former black and tans, RIC and auxiliaries, are going to enter into this kind of ever-growing powder keg of tension. All right, all the tensions that have existed from the broken promises of different British ministries not talking to each other, increased Jewish immigration that is only exacerbating this problem. All of this is going to continue to build, and this is the policing situation that these groups are going to start to step into. Speaking about specifically the British colonial policing in the Mandate in the 1920s, as decade to decade, there really is a certain kind of character and character change in policing from decade to decade, which is what I'll discuss now. As after World War I, in the new mandate was established, the British military was in charge initially of policing all of the mandate. And the British military proved that it was really not good at being a police force. It was good at being a military force, but certainly not a police force. And so there were some early disturbances, large-scale riots and other disturbances caused quite a bit of some loss of life. And this proved to the British government, not only is the British military not fit to be a police unit, but also it's incredibly expensive. And once again, as we always can come back to, if it's expensive for the British, they don't want to do it. And so they want to get the British military out of there as quickly as possible. And that is where the solution of initially the Palestine police comes about. The Palestine police are created in 1920, shortly after the start of the mandate, to be much more closely aligned with a metropolitan model of policing. They will be armed, but they're going to operate generally just in the cities, in large cities and larger towns. So the Palestine police, made up of an Arab section and a small British section, are going to start policing the mandate. However, within about 2 years, it becomes clear that there's a lot more to handle within the mandate than just the cities. And so there needs to be a kind of frontier force, a kind of customs force established to police the more rural areas of the Palestine Mandate. And that is where the British Gendarmerie and the Black and Tans are going to come in. So the Black and Tans get recruited into the British Gendarmerie, and they're put to work in the rural outlands of the Palestine Mandate, sometimes working alongside the Palestine police as they get closer into the cities, but really acting as a customs force and a border force within the Mandate. And again, there's all this fear and trepidation, both in the media and coming from British officials themselves, members of parliament, saying, we've seen what the Black and Tans have done in Ireland. What the hell are they going to do in the Palestine Mandate? And so there's all this fear about the British Gendarmerie coming into the Palestine Mandate. But as it turns out, it comes to really nothing. The next 8 years within the Mandate are almost entirely peaceful. There is the normal kind of crime that you would expect to see in any town or city. But throughout the Mandate, there's no large-scale uprising. There's no ambush reprisal between the Arab population, the Jewish population, the British Gendarmerie. It just doesn't manifest. So this kind of confounds everyone that thought that this violence was not going to be unique to Ireland. So this is kind of strange as the peace in the Middle East continues for years, and so it's going so well that again it comes back to money. The British Empire says, why are we fielding these two police forces when everything's going great in Palestine? And so they say we need to disband the British Gendarmerie and we will merge them with the Palestine police. And that is what happens in 1926. And as they do that, peace continues for another 3 years. There's no large-scale uprising. There's not a whole lot of discontent. The tension is still building and it's still there, but it's not manifesting in a large-scale way that the police need to respond to in a specific kind of way. That's all going to change in 1929, as the police are going to start to face an ever-increasing escalation in violence. From 1929 really until the end of the Mandate. The nature of that violence is going to change. Who the violence is coming from is going to change, but the violence is going to have an upward trajectory, a kind of up and down rhythm of huge explosions of violence and then reform in the way that the police operate, the way that they deal with the localities and things like that, and then another huge explosion of violence. And that's what we're going to be talking about now. In the starting with the 1929 massacre and into the 1930s. The 1929 massacre starts, as many of these large-scale uprisings do, with the funeral of a young boy. Funerals are always a flashpoint. They were a huge flashpoint often in Ireland between the Black and Tans and the IRA. It's the same case here in the Palestine Mandate as well. So there's a large-scale, the fight starts to break out at a young boy's funeral. Jewish and Arab forces come to blows, and it's the job of the Palestine police to start to quell this escalating violence as it starts in Jerusalem and as violence starts to ripple out into smaller towns and cities. It's starting to become closer to an uprising, a large-scale insurrection. And so it's up to the Palestine police to put this down. And it just doesn't happen. The police are totally overwhelmed. There's nothing that they can do. Peace cannot be restored. And as you can see, the results are self-evident. 83 Muslims, 4 Christians, and 109 Jews are killed, and many more are wounded. And another pattern that we start to see with the British government is anytime something goes wrong, you can bet that there is going to be a commission that is put into the field to figure out why it happened. So there are 2 commissions that are put into the field, the Shaw Commission and the Hope Simpson Commission. The Shaw Commission comes to the conclusion that particularly the British section of the Palestine police is not really involved with the community they're policing. None of them speak Hebrew, none of them speak Arabic, or hardly any of them do. They don't really understand the population that they're working with. They've kind of cloistered themselves away and let the Arab section of the police kind of do most of the day-to-day work, so that the British need to improve on actually being a part of this community that they are policing. The Hope Simpson report takes a bit of a different tack and looks at the land use and immigration issue of Jewish immigration into the mandate, and determines that Arab unrest, surprise, surprise, in the Palestine Mandate is a result of being pushed into an economic periphery. Great Britain is picking winners and losers economically in the mandate. They're choosing to use Jewish intermediaries, financial intermediaries within the mandate, and Arab intermediaries and businessmen are getting pushed out of the market. And so the Hope Simpson report puts this out, presents it to Parliament, and it gets summarily ignored. But the Shaw Commission is not ignored, at least by the Palestine police, as it does start to evolve as a police force. And as we start to see in the 1930s, the violence is going to continue to escalate, and the police force is going to try to change its ways to meet it. We see that with the 1933 riots. As after the Shaw Commission comes out, the Palestine police force puts into effect a lot of different training programs to try to address some of the issues that they had called out. That they put in training for Arabic and Hebrew speakers, so that there's someone within each unit that can speak to people that they are policing, and many other programs to try to alleviate some of those issues. And for 3 years, it seems to be working. Murders within the mandate start to drop pretty precipitously. However, in 1933, once again, it all changes, as there is yet another extreme bout of violence that starts to break out. And during this time, the Palestine police, they put into practice some of these new tactics that they have tried to train into these units to kind of keep the loss of life to a minimum. And after the 1933 riots, which again were widespread, not just in Jerusalem, but throughout the region, 27 dead, 243 injured. And once again, there is a commission that is put into the field. And the Murrison Commission says all of the training really worked. Only 27 people died. And so to them, this is a resounding success, that things are getting better, and that we really figured out how to deal with large-scale riots and how to quell them before they become insurrections, because that is the real benchmark of success. Did it rise to the level of a full-scale insurrection? And in the 1933 riots, it didn't, so it's deemed a success. It does still kind of want the Palestine police to start to tweak their processes to adapt to these ever-changing threats, but for the moment, they think that they're doing great. That is, once again, until the next bout of violence that starts to flare up in 1936 and the Arab Revolt of 1936. As on 15th of April, 1936, violence eventually broke out again and antagonized over disputes concerning immigration. The argument always comes back to Jewish immigration. At this point, there's never been a cap put on it, and there has never been any enforcement to try to mitigate this, the Jewish immigration into the Palestine Mandate. And so by 1936, Arab groups are starting to work together, and they're starting to formally protest against this immigration. And in 1936, once again, large-scale demonstrations break out, but were quickly dispersed, and the violence was largely quelled. Not a real loss of life during the initial 1936 revolt. However, the Arab National Committee, this kind of governing body of these various groups, does decide that much like in Ireland in 1913, a labor lockout is what's going to be needed to get the ear of the British government. Once again, if you hit them in the wallet, the Brits will start to pay attention. And so a general strike of Arab labor starts soon thereafter. And during this strike, this labor strike, there's also, kind of violent rejoinder that goes along with it. We start to see attacks not only increasingly on Jewish communities, but also on Arabs who are not participating in the labor strike. And so violence is escalating in 1936, 1937, 1938. It really starts to reach a crescendo in 1938. As we start to see the violence is almost daily, and as it has been the case in the 1920s, 1930s, the attacks are usually Arab attacks on Jewish communities, and the Palestine police, one of their main jobs is to protect these Jewish communities. Okay, so for 20 years, the Palestine police have largely been protecting Jewish communities. That's been one of their primary tasks. And this is becoming increasingly problematic throughout this time period in 1939. But in 1938, the violence starts to wane. It's really starting to lose some of its gas. And around that same time in Europe, there is a war that is brewing. And as Hitler starts to invade Poland in 1939, the Arab revolt has all but dissipated. And as soon as war is declared by Great Britain, all the violence stops. The Arabs unequivocally declare their loyalty to Great Britain, and they say, we're on your side. At the same time, Jewish groups that have, Jewish defense groups that have started to form in response to these attacks from Arab gangs have said, we are tired of British rule. Even though these are the people that have been protecting us for 20 years, we think this is going to be our state, and the Brits are occupiers at this point. So at the same moment that the Arabs, these Arab groups declare their loyalty to Great Britain, Jewish defense groups are going to start waging war, not only continued war on Arab communities, but also now on the British police and British officials, seeing them as occupiers. And this is going to take place throughout the war, which I'll briefly talk about now. So in World War II, again, these kind of Jewish groups that formed during the Arab Revolt, and in some cases prior to that, the Haganah, the Palmach, the Stern Gang, and the Irgun. Some differences between them. The Haganah was a defense organization that protected Jewish settlements and communities. So whenever areas that they thought that the police weren't really giving them the protection that they needed, they started to create their own defense groups. With the Palmach connected very closely to the Haganah, being its full-time kind of guerrilla fighter wing of that outfit, filled with ex-European servicemen. The Stern Gang, as you might imagine by the name, specialized in sabotage, and the Irgun specialized in assassination. All of these groups, at some point or another, kind of cross over like a Venn diagram into their operations, but generally this is how these groups kind of formed, and this is what they became very good at, particularly during the war and in a couple years after that as well. And throughout World War II, attacks from Jewish gangs and terrorist groups increased dramatically. For much of their tenure, the Palestine police were protecting Jewish communities from Arab attack, but now those same Jewish communities were the ones that were attacking the British police forces who had protected them for years. Still, throughout the war effort, the Palestine police are kind of conscripted into military service, used as intelligence gatherers, much like the Royal Irish Constabulary was used as the eyes and ears of the British military in Ireland as well. And throughout that time, they have also recruited tremendously. This is the highest number of Palestine police in the mandate that you will see for its tenure. So this is really the high watermark of the effectiveness of the Palestine police, despite this kind of changing landscape of now having to also be a counter-terrorist unit as well. And so this is whenever the Palestine police become their own model for the empire, in very much the same way that the RIC had. The RIC had been the gold standard within the empire for policing, and now the Palestine police have taken that mantle. If you work in Palestine for any amount of time, you are promoted out and up somewhere else in the empire. And so if you've done time in Palestine, you're going to do very well elsewhere. They want you to take the model, whatever the Palestine police has been doing, and they want you to replicate that wherever you are sent. So this really becomes the gold standard for policing within the empire. But as World War II draws to a close, we're going to see a pretty rapid decline, not only in policing, but also the coherence of the mandate itself, as post-war violence is going to be tremendous. After the war, the Palestine police force had their numbers slashed significantly to even lower than pre-war numbers. Great Britain is financially spent after the war, and so as they are doing their imperial ledger books and figuring out how they can continue to do empire on the cheap, police within the mandate do not make the list very high. And so we're going to see their numbers slashed significantly. Jewish groups that had formed prior to the war were beginning to coordinate activities, and the Palmach in particular started to carry out sabotage and assassination missions more frequently against the diminished capabilities of the police. The most notable of these attacks, as they are increasingly waged not just on police or military personnel, but also their families and those that are connected to them. The most notable of these events was the King David Hotel bombing of July 22nd, 1946. King David Hotel housed British administrative headquarters for all of the mandate. It was carried out by the Irgun at the behest of the Haganah and the Jewish Agency, again, a kind of governing body of these groups. The attack left 91 Arabs, Britons, and Jews dead, with 46 injured. Again, there were some family members that were living in the King David Hotel, as well of British personnel. And so these attacks are not just relegated to combatants any longer. Not long after, in 1947, members of the British Special Air Service, a kind of clandestine special forces unit that was propped up during World War II, specialized in working behind enemy lines during the war. Members of the SAS were attached to squads of the Palestine police to infiltrate Jewish communities and flush out terrorists. And so we start to see this kind of reversion in tactics, and we have a lot of evidence pointing, different memos saying, we need to look back at what we did in Ireland. We need to look at how we flushed people out. We need to look at how we attacked leaders of these organizations. And some of the solutions look like this, where they attach the SAS to it to try to infiltrate and try to use terror itself to try to overcome some of these issues. The plan did not work and showed a near complete reversion to the tactics that were used in the Irish War for Independence. The growing tension and potential danger facing families of British officials caused all British non-combatant civilians and residents to be evacuated January 31st, 1947. So the situation just becomes far too dangerous, and some of these individuals have been here for 25 years, 30 years. And so they have made a family. A lot of their families lived here. They all need to be evacuated at this point. It's far too dangerous for them to be here. By September 1947, the United Nations Special Council on Palestine had assembled its findings from 4 months of work and recommended that the mandate be dissolved and, surprise, surprise, a partition be put into place between to create an Arab and a Jewish state. So this is the initial framework that is put forth by, again, the newly minted United Nations. And this obviously is never going to come to pass. It's just going to be a path towards civil war. And the British portion of the Palestine police remained in service until it was evacuated on May 5th, 1948. The day after they leave the mandate, it expires, and David Ben-Gurion declared the state of Israel. Meanwhile, the rest of the region devolves into chaos, and that, I think, leads into the part that is a lot more well known. the last 70 years or so of what happens within now the state of Israel, and the growing of Palestinian identity, but also relegating them to Gaza and the West Bank and all that unfolds from there. But hopefully, as we can see from the end of this, as we can see using policing as the kind of lens with which to look at both Ireland and the Palestine Mandate, we can see a lot of these similarities, the connection that the British have made between these two regions. And it's no surprise then that now, as tensions have continued to grow and we see what is happening every day on the news, it's no surprise that MPs and Sinn Féin are coming out to talk and give support for Palestinians in Gaza, and to talk about why the Irish struggle for freedom and for their own land is so intrinsically connected to the Palestine Mandate and this legacy that is created really by the British, once again, meddling and drawing lines where they shouldn't be. And so hopefully from this, you can pick up a lot of these different connections and similarities. I'd be happy to take any questions that you all have. I'd be happy to talk to you about it down at the bar as well tonight, whatever you'd like to talk about. I'd like to open it up. Yes, sir.
I have a two-part question. I just read in a book by a man named Rashid Khalidi, who wrote a book called The 100 Years of War in Palestine, 1917 to 2017. And I was actually pretty horrified to read in that book that some of the tactics that the British used in putting down during the Palestine Mandate were tactics that they developed in Ireland. And the one that I found particularly horrifying was that they would take locals and strap them to the front of vehicles and then drive those vehicles into crowds in order to stop them. So part one of my question is, can you talk a little bit about the actual tactics that they used? And part two, do you see that as a continuum of what started in Ireland in the 1920s, moving to Palestine, and then into Northern Ireland during the Troubles?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic question and incredibly well put. The tactics that transitioned from Ireland into the Palestine Mandate, definitely, and Khalidi is a fantastic author. I haven't seen the particular instances of the cars and strapping someone to it. I don't necessarily doubt that it did happen. That does sound about right. Some of the more brutal things that I have seen in the tactics that have evolved from Ireland into the Palestine Mandate, I think one of them that would come up is the tactics that they come up with for the 1933 riots. Whenever this is seen as such a success, one of the things that makes it such a success to them in their view was this new tactic that they have evolved, first from the Metropolitan Police and riot control, but then also that had been used briefly in Ireland, and that is this kind of riot squad where they have shields, batons on this front line, and then they have gentlemen on horseback with rifles in the back. And they let everyone be known that they're going to push with the shields, they're going to beat you with the batons, and then they're going to blow a whistle 3 times. And if the crowd is not dispersed by the 3rd whistle, they're going to fire indiscriminately into the crowd. And so we see that kind of, certainly that kind of tactic of firing indiscriminately in a crowd. We see that directly from the Black and Tans in places like Croke Park and the atrocities that are committed there. So definitely there are definitely tactics that are brought through there from Ireland during the war and then into the Palestine Mandate. As far as into the Troubles, I can't speak directly on that. What I can say is probably that, much like whenever I reference that the Palestine Mandate becomes the training ground in much the same way that Ireland is this laboratory for empire for centuries, Palestine becomes a training ground for police and for empire. And so a lot of those promotions back out from Ireland, a lot of those go to the Ulster Constabulary. So a lot of those same individuals from Palestine, they end up back in Ireland, but they'll end up as part of the Ulster Rifles up there. And so a lot of those same tactics are going to be pushed into. I don't know for sure. I haven't looked into that deeply, but I do know that a lot of those personnel, especially after the disbandment in '48, they make their way back to Ireland to continue a policing career for the British. So I can only imagine that it does take place, a kind of continuation of those tactics, and they continue to evolve. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
That's a very good one. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
It would amaze you that none of this ever gets in our history courses.
It does not amaze. It does not surprise me at all. Of course, I wish that it would. There's a lot of aspects, especially about I think particularly not just about the war for independence, but also the Mandate period in general kind of gets forgotten. And especially if you study decolonization as I do, it's kind of a footnote in everything, because there is a lot going on in the rest of the empire. There's a lot of other stuff going on, but this kind of gets hidden away from it. And in so many ways, it's indicative of everything else that the British Empire does. If you're looking at the partition in India, if you're looking obviously at the partition in Ireland, there's so many of these tactics that they use that they think are going to just fix the problem, or at least make it not their problem anymore. And so it is definitely something that should be looked at far more often to hopefully learn from and not continue to make the same mistake over and over and over. Yes, sir.
You plan on making a book out of this? Are you a piece of it?
If you're a publisher, I am very willing to check. I would love to. There's a few works that kind of work around this same world. There's a fantastic one if you're at all interested in how policing works in the rest of the empire. It's called At the End of the Line by Georgina Sinclair. She writes magnificently about but more briefly about how these two models of policing are exported elsewhere throughout the empire. So how influential the Irish model is, and how it looks in Jamaica. How does it look in Kenya? How does it look in India? So that's one of them that I think is pretty tremendous. Sean William Gannon, a fantastic Irish historian, has also written pretty prolifically about the British Gendarmerie and some of these units more in specific. He's more focused on British culture and how British identity is involved with a lot of these aspects. So he doesn't really look at the transition and the evolution in the same way that I do. But he's also a fantastic author that you could look at.
Are the black and tans refueled with more Irish recruits as time goes on, maybe from Northern Ireland? Is there a steady stream of it, or does it kind of peter out and other people replace them?
So the black and tans are almost entirely British, and so the RIC does continue to get some recruits of Irish themselves, but really the black and tans, the auxiliaries, they're almost 100% British, and so that lends to some character of why they are, in my opinion anyway, why they are so well remembered, because most of the violence is coming from them. The RIC does participate in the violence, to be sure, but it's not in the same manner, and it's not to the same extent, because you still do have a good core of RIC that are Irish, and even though they stay in for the job, they write a lot about the conflict that they have, this loyalty to Ireland, and even if they do think that Ireland should be its own state and it should be united and all of these things, they still don't get out of the job and they cite many of the human reasons you might expect. They've got a family, they got to pay for it. The RIC pays really well, and so they've got to put food on the table. So not to justify their, what they do, but they do give a lot of reasons for why they stay in and why they continue to aid and abet. Other questions? Yes, and then
Given the horrors of the Holocaust in World War II and the sympathy to create a Jewish state, What then happens with the relationship of the British to the Arab peoples living there?
That's an excellent question. Something that I just couldn't go into too deeply, but after the discovery of concentration camps and the Holocaust, there had been discussions continually of kind of putting a quota or a limit on Jewish immigration month to month or year to year. These conversations happen in Parliament all the time. There's always someone pushing for, this is the problem in the mandate. The reason we have so many issues is because the whole population is angered about Jewish immigration. So if we address Jewish immigration in some kind of meaningful way, maybe we can start to get a more peaceful population. So it gets brought up a lot in Parliament. It just never goes anywhere because there's a lot of competing interests. Lord Rothschild, Chaim Weizmann, many others who are have a vested interest in never capping immigration. And so none of that ever really gets anywhere to begin with. But after World War II, the conversation doesn't happen anymore. So in Parliament, you don't see any talk about, hey, we should cap immigration. There is no stomach in Parliament for denying the Jewish people anything at that point. And so the fight for a Jewish homeland becomes a lot easier because you don't even have, there's no real opposition for it anymore. Yes, sir.
Just wanted to mention what George Bernard Shaw said about all these commissions. You know the quote, I guess. They compared it to a man going to the bathroom. The great body sits, and for a long time nothing is heard. Then a loud report is issued, and the matter is dropped.
That is about right. That is about right, yes. And that is, I didn't really even talk about it, but in 1921, 1922, when the early violence is still happening under the military, there were even more, commissions and reports back there. There were commissioning reports in Ireland that we didn't talk about because, at least here, the people that are administering the police in the Palestine Mandate, they take the commissions to heart and they try to implement these things. In Ireland, those commissions weren't going anywhere. They said, okay, and, just like what you would do in the toilet, that's what they used for. So they really didn't get anywhere after, at any time, at least from what I could see. Other questions? All right, thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Thank you to the Kaylee Club. We'll see some of you downstairs.